What happens when law, business, and life collide? Each week on Lead Counsel, your host Tom Tona will take a deep dive into topics related to the law, the business of law, and life. There will be insightful discussions with industry insiders, experts, and thought leaders making significant contributions and meaningful differences in their fields of expertise. Tom is the founder and managing attorney at TonaLaw. He has been a practicing attorney since 1994 and the leader of TonaLaw since it opened in 2001. The goal of this podcast is to provide you with free information on law and the business of law, and to give you actionable tools related to each of these areas. Now, here's Tom.
Hey, this is your host, Tom Tona. I'm here with Juliet. Welcome back to the Lead Counsel Podcast. Jules, what's going on?
Hello. Welcome back, everybody.
How you doing? You're full of smiles today.
Doing well. You know, what's not to smile about? I'm living, I'm breathing.
You live in large. You live in La Vida Loca.
Exactly.
There's a reference nobody's going to know because nobody knows who Ricky Martin is.
Vida Loca. It's like from Shrek. That's how I know it.
Oh, you're hilarious, dude. So today's guest is somebody I've been waiting to get on for a long time. I love the guy. I met him at a mastermind 2 years ago, roughly 2-3 years ago at this point. I think maybe more. Seth Price from Price Benowitz. And Seth is a brilliant legal business mind. He travels the country. He's a sought after speaker, and he's a genius, in my opinion, at law firm development, growth, scaling strategies. And he is the owner of not one, but 2 8-figure businesses. So as somebody who has really wanted to get their law firm to that 8-figure mark, right? And by 8-figure, we're talking 10 million and up. That's rarefied air for most businesses in general, right? These are the statistics basically that I have read is that only 4% or 6% of US companies reach 10 million or greater. So out of 28 million companies, only about 112,000 ever reach the $10 million mark.
And we were lucky enough to speak with one of them today.
Seth Price runs 2 multiple 8 figures. So we're talking about 10 to 20 to $30 million business, right? And he runs 2 of them. The first one is Price Benowitz, and Seth is the business end. His partner, David Benowitz, is the lawyer's lawyer, as Seth likes to say. But Seth built out a multi-state law firm with a focus on personal injury, wrongful death, medical malpractice, workers' compensation law. He also has a criminal defense practice in there. That's a big part of his practice. And he's received, I can't even tell you, countless awards and accolades for his dedication and ability to stand out in the legal field as a business titan, but in the business world in general. His other company is BlueShark Digital. He'll tell us a story about that too. It's actually a pretty funny story. And Seth is just the most down-to-earth guy you'll ever meet. And this is why I urge people, go to masterminds, go to rooms that are much bigger than yours, than where you're at. Go with the people like Seth and others that are 8-figure lawyers. It's very humbling, very humbling. So without further ado, let's get rocking and rolling with Seth, because man, I'm excited to have this guy on. Seth, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here.
How are you?
Doing well.
So I'm going to start out with this, and I didn't prep Jules for it, but when I went to John Fisher's mastermind recently, I went to a buddy of ours, Craig Goldenfarb's law firm, right? And Craig is also in the 8-figure club. This podcast is all going to be about building an 8-figure law firm. I've been fascinated by what you guys have built, and I'm looking at your office behind you, and I'm going, okay, I went to Craig's office, and I was just blown away. Because I know like what it takes conceptually. Like it's not your everyday. I think like 1 in every 100,000 companies is actually an 8-figure company across the country. I think that the exact number is like 1 in 130,000 or something. So I'm just blown away. And now that I know what a real 8-figure firm looks like, now next time I'm in DC, I got to get out to see your operations, right? Because it's a different world, and it's a different world. So I'm really excited to talk to you, man. And I appreciate you coming on.
No, it's a little humbling. You know, you had sort of told me why you wanted to speak. And I was like, you know, look, we get the Inc. 5000s, and I'm actually at BlueShark today. This is the industrial look of BlueShark behind me. Price Benowitz is sort of, Class A space downtown DC with satellites, Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina. But it is, when you think about it, I look at it, I got two organizations, both multiple eight figures. It's sort of like you pinch yourself once in a while. And you don't want to think about it too much because you think about the number of people that go to bed every night with like that your paycheck is getting them and their families through the day. So that's a little scary.
That's crazy. And so the actual statistic is that of the companies that make it to 1 million, and I don't have that stat, but only 1 in 3 will make it to 10 million. And to hear multiple eight figures, 2 multiple eight figures, and there's one common denominator, and that's you. So like I'm blown away. And the other thing is that Jules, you've met Craig, now you're meeting Seth. You will never meet more down-to-earth, humble guys than like I've now known Seth a couple of years now. We've been seeing each other at different masterminds. And I just can't tell you how humbling it is to be in your groups and have you facilitating and to learn from you. And like, man, you can drill down on issues. You clearly know my pain points as I'm making the journey to 8 figures, right?
Well, that's part of what's sort of good about, and as you see, like depends on how your firm is set up. My law firm, because I have all these different practice groups, the good news is if you're ADHD like me, it's like there's always something on fire. So there's always something to put your attention to. And when that gets boring, you go somewhere else. So to a certain extent, been there, done that. And I think one of the things I just focus on is trying to learn from those things in the past. One of the things I love about Fisher's group, mastermind group, is even though some of the people aren't as advanced, when I think about those issues, the fundamentals that get you there, fundamentals are fundamentals. And if you do it at a smaller scale and then you supersize it, great. And yes, just like kids, bigger issues, but there are certain fundamentals about how you build and how you grow and how you deal with people that I think generally comport across the boards. And so that's why it's really neat when you see people at different stages. There's things you forgot about on the way, right? How do you make that first hire, that first administrative hire? We heard a lot about that, right? Now I take that as a given, but I also do remember way back when I started not wanting to spend money on non-revenue producing things. I was way late to the game getting sort of an administrative person hired too cheaply. Got very lucky in my journey to have somebody who came on board and built and grew with me. But that person, that non-lawyer ops people, forget about marketing. Juliet's the most important person at the firm. I get that.
Right. She is. Is. Yeah,
So like the golden trio, right? As you build and grow is you need to make the phones ring so that you got to have your marketing and some strategy, whatever it may be, in place. Secondly, when the phones ring, somebody's got to answer it. And that's not talked about nearly enough. I mean, there are people out there talking about it, but it is the least sexy. And, you do all the marketing in the world, but if you're not converting or converting really poorly. And then finally, the ops. I'm taking the lawyering out of this, right? So the way I built my firm, I divided and conquered from day one with a partner where he was in charge of lawyering and I was in charge of everything else. And so that ops piece where you extricate yourself, and I think a lot of myself, but I was not the greatest with ops, meaning there are people that are more attention to detail, less ADHD, who can actually get things to move along. And that if you do want to build and scale, it is that giving up. And that's what I see most people having the hardest time with is how much do you still have your hand in stuff? And how much harm are you doing? And again, present company included, when you continue to try to dabble rather than build that great pyramid and let your direct reports do their job.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head on so many levels, right? There's some fear there. And it could be fear of a price tag that's unfounded, right? Like I know for me, there were certain blocks. I was like, oh my God. And you have this way of saying things like, you might give me a 30-second snippet. And because you're from New York, you're not like, oh, Tom, let me coddle you, right? You're like, what? I'm not going to say the F word because then we have to bleep it or market mature. But you see me at one mastermind, you go, dude, what are you doing? You're trying to scale your personal injury division and you're still on a certain software. So you see me again at somebody else's marketing thing that we were at down in Georgia. And you're like, hey man, I asked you before, what software are you using? The third time you saw me, you're like, if I see you next time, you still give me the same answer. We're not talking. What the F are you doing? Right. So, but you got me off my butt and I pulled the trigger on Smart Advocate. It was a big price tag. Oh my God, it's been revolutionizing everything in the firm. And we've only been live since December. Right. But what's awesome about being in the same rooms as you, and I talk about it all the time, is I want rooms where I'm not the biggest fish. I could go to a room, my revenue levels. I could go to a room and surround myself for ego, be the biggest one in the room, but I don't learn anything. Yeah, I could provide value and I will still get value, like you're saying, from the core, the basics, the fundamentals, even in like the martial arts I do. I'm not an athletic guy. I'm 55. But when you rely on the fundamentals, they work, right? So they work even as you're scaling. So it is a a good reminder, but I love being in rooms with you, Craig. I mean, that is like the pain that I'm going through. I love knowing, A, you didn't get there without that pain, right? Like you had pain, I'm assuming, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So go back to I think you described it as you were in your basement with David, right? David Benowitz, your partner. And how long have you been in Price Benowitz?
Well,
how long has it been?
Basically, I've known Dave since 87.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Okay.
We went to college together. We were fraternity brothers at UPenn. We took the same year off, ended up at law school together at GW, and did the same law clinic, ended up as roommates by third year. And so I've been stuck with him. He did the public defender route. I went a little bit of corporate law, but got myself to New York during the first dot-com bubble, involved with this company, US Law. That was sort of a precursor to LegalZoom or Fine Law today. And just had a great old time. He burnt out and really wanted to practice law again after burning out of the public defenders, and I didn't. We walked the franchise floor. I had a real estate concept I wanted to do. And we were in his basement, let's divide and conquer. You be essentially the chief legal officer. I'll be I didn't even know what a CMO was then, but I'll answer the phones and figure out a way to make this work. And that was where the passion for digital marketing came in. It was like, okay, well, people who were at that point marketing digitally in particular, felt that the people who did were generally the worst of the worst lawyers. I'm generalizing, but it was people on early, and particularly in criminal and other areas, were the people that were sort of really not the best and brightest. And the ones that were amazing were solos sitting by themselves. And so we were sort of the first in our market that combined those two, where Dave's a lawyer's lawyer. And he teaches at Harvard Law for a week every year. And he's done a couple of innocent project cases successfully. This guy cares about his craft. And me, it's not what gets me up in the morning. He loves the jury trial and being in front of a jury. And for me, it's, okay, how do I build this? How do I grow it? How can we? And as you saw, even at this mastermind I talked about, I wanted to pivot in our fee-for-service area, the criminal division. I've always had people directly selling themselves. I'm like, okay, can I scale further than 44 lawyers if I have people selling for them? It's not for the faint of heart in that it's a couple. You need somebody who ethically can do it, is licensed properly, or discloses what's going on. You don't want to bait and switch where somebody gets somebody amazing and then they show up at court and it's somebody else. But I also have sort of recognized that while I was very fortunate to have a very, very solid A-plus team, there are people that are great lawyers that may not be great at selling it. If I want to build and grow further, the only way to really do that is to be able to, just like everything else, we have the marketing, we have the operations, we have the accounting, we have collections, all these different things built out. That was one of those things. So yes, I love masterminds where I'm the little guy there and just watching Chad Dudley's and Andrew Finkelstein's talk about stuff.
Right.
Same time, I sometimes find that when I go back and re-question fundamentals and you see people doing stuff really creatively, that it sort of inspires you and fires you up and says, okay, these guys are fighting to get there. And there are times when it's kind of lonely because all these people are doing their things. And if you do, what I'm trying not to do is sort of just start to poke around at stuff, because the moment you start to do that, bad things happen, sometimes for a reason. But
Right. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I think that that's part of the magic of those rooms, right? If we're not in those rooms, those conversations don't happen. And so, I'm thinking about a friend of mine who has an intake attorney model. It's in PI, but it could easily translate. I started thinking about you the other day in that need, right? Any attorney that is looking to basically stop practicing but keep their hand in it could technically transition into exactly what you're looking for if you train them on what they're selling and they're clear, hey, I'm not going to be your attorney in court or on the file. Here's everything you need to know about how we handle criminal cases.
Right. Now, look, we have done it successfully in the PI side. We have a lawyer embedded, and we now have all the, thanks to Bill Biggs and others like John Knockhazel, we now look at our wants. 95% of our wants we sign. That's great stuff.
Gotcha.
And you know what's interesting? So building the firm, because we were sort of criminal centric before we added PI, which is now about a third more of the firm. We have family, it's trust and estates and all sorts of other nonsense. That when we did that, the people who answer the phone for personal injury are very different. If you do one of these personality tests, and the people you want for contingency, there's no money involved. So it's, can you be empathetic? Can you connect? Will they love you? Right. That's your number one goal. Once they know there's something there. On the fee for service side, as somebody with a digital funnel, where all these people are calling, texting, chatting, what makes or loses you money is, can you figure out what's monetizable and then spend your time with that? And so you need to be a lot more maniacal up front. What I always say to somebody is, hey, build all the time you want to speak. But before I let you sort of spill your guts about how a significant other is now arrested, I need to know where it is, what the charge is. Are you looking looking for, and this is what I would always say, when something sounded questionable on money, are you looking for a free public defender, trying to like give them the out, or a paid private attorney? Stuff that on the civil side, you're just not thinking about. You're like, hey, injured, we think there's a bucket of money to go after. Let's go get this case, right? Liability, we got our three legs, we're good. And so here it's, hey, we want this case, as we do a lot of cases, as a charge, but is this somebody who we can actually present a retainer to and receive funds for? And once you vetted, then you pivot into, hey, I see you served in the military. My colleague next door, was in the Marines. Which branch? You can start those conversations. But if you start from moment one, and there's always school of thought, oh, do that with everybody, you never know. I got 25 intake people right now. Like, it's some level. But at some level, if you don't start to think about where do you want to put your time, you can walk down the street and talk to people and hope they love you and refer you cases. Right. And I don't want to be mean about it, but there are different skill sets needed for different types of things. And that gets complicated because, you have an intake team, but you realize there are different parts to it with different sort of plus, things that are needed.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest emotion I would imagine, anybody calling for the criminal defense side, is fear, right? They are afraid. They're looking at bad things occurring. But that's an interesting analysis because you still have to figure out a way to screen through. Are you looking for free help? Do you understand the budgeting that's involved on a felony case, that type of thing, right?
That's why certain touch points, if somebody has a security clearance, you're not going to go down the financial route. You're assuming fine, right? It's knowing when you spend that additional time. Somebody's a student, then there's an exploration as to, okay, where are funds coming from? And that's a different.
So you need them to spend some time, but have a real subtle conversation to try to drill down on, can this person even afford to go to retainer stage?
Subtle, not settle, don't care, just need that done. And if you don't do that, and that's what's sort of interesting, because my current issue du jour that we talked about last week was that synapse between the intake, which is screening for that, and the lawyer that's going to go to court. Somebody's going to sell this person. It could be the intake. There's a whole school of thought of non-attorney dragons. There's a whole school of thought. It goes straight to the end user and they do it. I like that because there's no miscommunication. If a lawyer says it's going to cost this much, they're in court, it's on them. That middle piece gets scary, but that's sort of my sort of passion that I'm working on right now.
Yeah, and you'll be figuring it out as you go, right? You won't get it right the first couple of times. And the other thing about the masterminds that's so amazing is how real everybody is, right? Like you, Craig, you guys are at the pinnacle of what law firms can be, right? Multiple 8 figures, and you've built 2 multiple 8-figure businesses. So let's tie that back together for a second. When you first started this back with David in the basement, did you ever think you'd be doing what you're doing now? And what was your initial vision, if you even had one, other than paying the bills?
It was paying the bills plus. Real estate had sort of had a downturn, and we've done a bunch of investing in that space and just needed some cash. That was the initial. We needed a business, we needed some cash, and it kind of just took off. So there was no like long-term vision, we're going to do this someday. There was no roadmap for it. Frankly, a lot of people have followed our path. I now see there are people who've done these massively scaled family law firms. Obviously, PI firms have scaled, but nobody really scaled in our space. So there was no sort of like, this is where we want to be. But we did something. We added another website, hired another lawyer, built another website. And it was that sort of iteration of, if it works, we kept doing it. And all of a sudden, and that's why a lot of the things like administrative underpinnings, that if you're growing pretty modestly, you can see this was like by necessity. We need a person, look, some of it was when I was younger, I would say hungrier, but there were no kids floating around. I started out when Craigslist was the way.
Yeah, I remember those days.
There's a thing called Craigslist that now they're like 1,500 different websites that each of these things. But hiring we built the firm. The first 6 years of the firm was built on Craigslist till that stopped working. But I would literally stay up at night. And my attitude was, if I had resumes, I'd call people between like 8 and 9:30. And if somebody thought it was too late, my attitude was, it wasn't the right person anyway. But if somebody was like annoyed I was calling that late, that was sort of the mindset that I had. And I'll never forget, I found a woman online who was like, she became like an hourly recruiter for us. And this was in hyper growth mode. It was, she would screen the people off of Craigslist. She would do a screen. She'd invite them to Starbucks at 7th and H for a sit down. If they passed, she would text me or email me, and I would go to the Starbucks at 7th and E, and they'd walk down the street and have a second meeting. And if they passed me, we'd walk to the firm down the block. And that was the 1, 2, 3 sort of like process. I've had conservatively 6 or 7 employee meltdowns in my 19 years of doing this. And I'm saying 3 or 4 lawyers that stopped doing their work but didn't tell us. I mean, we've had, alcohol-infused rages. There have been all sorts of crazy things that have gone on in that process. And that ironically, I think, maybe it's because we were scaled, COVID to a certain extent made some of this simpler because of the virtual environment and the fact that we were looking at metrics more. That I used to think, hey, somebody's in the office working, I'm good. That was a false assumption.
Right.
And that as we've gone virtual or hybrid or whatever you're doing, the thought of, especially with technology, that we can make sure that productivity is there, whether it's KPIs or other tools that you're using, is probably better than the old school, well, the guy's showing up every day, so I must be fine. It turned out it was just the opposite. There were people sitting at their desks, and literally, if they were in a bad place, they were sitting there, you assumed all was well, and it just wasn't.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, we have hybrid, we have remote workers in different states. And yeah, it's about the KPI reporting, right? Like one of my big burns last year, I was so mad at myself, but I hired somebody remote, but I didn't assign a KPI number, right? Because we're not up to that in EOS yet, coming up with that one accountability number. And I'm like, how did I miss this for 6 months? How did I miss this from August through December? Which now, obviously, I learned the hard way. It'll never happen again. I was interviewing somebody yesterday, and you really kind of changed my mindset, even with the trial attorneys I'm looking for, to be honest with you. You have done so many things in 30-second snippets when we talk sometimes that I owe you more than one beer, and I don't know how to say thank you, but you changed my mindset. So I'm talking to this trial attorney. He's an A-level player. And after talking to you, we're going down a different kind of path. It's a ever-changing work in progress, right? I have had the same pain points, but that's also the beauty of talking to you, where you're like, yeah, we've had several alcohol rage, whatever. I've seen the same thing, right?
As you scale, when you see people that don't fit the mold, the culture of what you're doing, I'm now at the point where I see times where I see opportunity where I'd love to hire people. I know I'd make money, but if it can hurt your entire kingdom, if it could bring I would say house of cards, but it could bring the whole pyramid, not down, but really take out a piece of it, like a Jenga game, you just got to be really careful. And that stuff, decisions and flyers. I remember when we started the PI practice, brought a woman in who was dynamo. She was do everything, and she was, by herself. She was a force of nature. That highest highs, lowest lows did not end well. It ended poorly. Should we not have done it? It got us to where we were, which helped us get to where we are. But it is very, very sort of humbling that with scale, things need to be looked at differently. And the downside, the risk of things being hurt, from an action that you take or a hire that you make, the consequences seem to get even greater.
Really? See, that's a big disclosure, because again, I'm not at your scale. We have 25 people internally, and I think 14 or 15 overseas in the Philippines. We're around 40, but we have people managing the Philippines internally, et cetera, right? The crazy part of that is I was under the impression that with scale, you have more redundancy built in. But what you're saying is the bigger you get, the higher the stakes are. So one toxic hire versus, I was listening to a great podcast a friend of mine was on, Michelle Fuller. I met her probably 6 months ago, and she's an attorney out of somewhere in the Midwest, and she also has a practice in California. She maintains 2 residences. She came home from vacation and half her staff was gone. One person poisoned the pool. She said she had her best quarter ever once she could diffuse the emotions, right? But that's different when you're playing at a scale. How many people do you have, and how many attorneys are in Price Benowitz?
44 attorneys and, over 100 total employees.
Yeah, that's massive, right? So you're saying the stakes are even higher on the decisions.
Well, right. And look, I've done all sorts of stuff, like things. I have one attorney who doesn't work and play well with others the same way, very high strung. They have an office away from everybody else. Right. They have their own staff. I mean, our staff has to deal with them, but it's pain points. The accounting department, IT department, it takes a toll. And it's not really like if I were somebody who does well in an area, I want to expand further. But that's a great example. Like I probably haven't been able to scale because that person doesn't really let things build on top of them.
So that ends up being the cap on the scale at that point. I got to ask you that question, because if you're working with Bill Biggs, and I know you do EOS, and you're big on the coaching publishing front for yourself, you've gone from 7 figures to 8 figures to multiple 8 figures in 2 businesses. Is it possible to maintain culture and the shared core values and still scale to 100 or 150 employees? And is it possible? And what are the biggest pain points in that process other than what you've already discussed? Like, I know you said, maintaining it and the moves you make, but
I think that I'm humble enough to come with that. We built with our head down. That's what got us there, right? Dave and I are, we treat people well. We're not compared to the rest of the legal profession. We're well within the standard deviation of non-crazy. Debate. And so I think we layered some of this on. I think that it is an aspiration that, we have and we want to live within it. But I would argue that as you repeat these things, like way back, I remember one of my close buddies had like a plaque on his wall with their core values. It was literally something bought on Amazon with random words on it.
Right.
And it wasn't until you sit down and think about what do you stand for. And, there are different, some people beat it with a drum at their weekly meetings. As you say it over and over again, it becomes a thing. Like as you interview with them, ours is PI, passion, integrity, excellence, right? And so as we talk to each person coming in, do you have the passion for what you're doing? Integrity we take as table stakes. Are you great at what you're doing? You look at those and it becomes a thing that we do over and over again. The theory becomes reality. And that I would say, are things perfect? Does that mean that it is something that as you strive to be better and better that way each day, and as you get further and further away from people, and when we started, I knew everybody. I knew everybody's significant other. I knew their birthday. As you build and grow, you need to have these touch points. And as you have those commonalities, I think it leaves the concept of a sign and becomes sort of how you think about things. And if you hire and fire with them, if you run your meetings with them, when you make evaluations on promotions, those things that as you implement it, I saw it like mentors of mine, like John Morgan. I remember when I read his book, which is Genius, the Teach Hungry book. I knew him well enough to know that a lot of the stuff he talked about in the book wasn't necessarily being done at that moment. But sure as shit, if you watch the last decade,
yes,
put a lot of that stuff in. He said, I want to be there. And by saying it, it became. I've never actually,
100%.
I've seen that. BlueShark had to be renamed. It was BlueSpark Digital when we started.
Oh, okay.
We got a cease and desist letter like 8 months in. and 2 lawyers gave me the same advice. Pay me $80,000 and change the name or just change the name.
Right.
We were not in the right. We'd missed it. So
I
changed it. It was at a Sharks game with David Brenton, president. We flipped one letter. Spark became Shark. And I hated it. People would say it. They'd answer the phone.
I love it. I love it.
But you say it enough times, it's a thing. When it first happened, it's not as good as Spark. I love Spark. I came up with Spark. So my point is if you say it, live it, and become it, it's a thing. If it's a plaque on the wall, it really doesn't get you very far.
I love that. Go ahead, Jules. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, at what point did you start your digital marketing business, and how far along were you in the law firm business at the point that you started?
Law firm was getting there. It was probably 20, 25 lawyers at the time, probably about 7, 8 years ago. And
that's a lot.
And so we had built it with digital marketing. I'm passionate about it. As Tom knows, so we just did a competitor just did an analysis of our site, one of 25 that we run to the firm. But there was a bunch of reasons behind it. It started out, I loved, when I went to conferences, I'm kind of frugal, and I discovered 2 things. If you speak, you don't pay, and you generally hang out in the green room before with a bunch of other really smart people. And it's just really high level network. You play a little badge, people come up and talk to you. It's pretty cool. So that was, and then everybody else had some widget they were selling, and I did. I come back to the office, and my story is I had a Jules every 2 years, sometimes a guy, sometimes a woman, but every 2 years I'd have a right-hand person that helped with my marketing, and I'd lose them every 2 years for some random thing. One guy's a sports agent, one guy's trying to end AIDS internationally, another guy is doing something else. But every 2 years, like clockwork, I would lose somebody. I said, this is getting old. I don't want to continue to have to do that. I wanted to give opportunities for the people I had within. And so we already had an 8-person team doing digital, which was aggressive, and said, hey, we could take this, and instead of losing our content person and our technical person and our links person every couple of years, we've had ridiculous retention. And that's allowed us to not just serve as Price Benowitz, but 250 other law firms, because each of these people that know what they're doing can then basically scale that. And digital marketing whether it's SEO or web design or whether it's PPC, it's not rocket science. It's execution on best practices. And so being able to do that and replicate it and not have to worry about somebody disappearing, having to start from place zero. Jules, that's why we did it about 8, maybe almost 9 years ago.
And it's grown to 8 figures at this point. That's
multiple. I mean, his firm is huge. And for anybody that's listening to this, because there's a huge amount of attorneys and they come up to me at these masterminds and, I listen to podcasts. If you have not checked out the new Price Benowitz website, it is, and I never use the words, a thing of beauty with regard to a website. But dude, I don't know what brought me to your website. I guess I was like, kind of like, let me look at color schemes. I hate my color scheme, whatever it is. And I literally spent like an hour just looking at your website and whatever you did. I mean, and then I watched that competitor do the analysis, which I thought was pretty awesome. This is somebody that's like, this is how you build a traffic magnet website, and it's streamlined and it's clean. And if people would, because I hear people all the time, like, who do you recommend for SEO? Lawyers in the game that don't understand it are literally like, I hate this game. I hate it. And you're probably on the Pilma chain that comes in and everybody's like, I just fired my website, my SEO company. Do you know anybody? If anybody's listening to this, just a plug for Seth's company. Holy cow, man. Your website is like a monument to what a law firm website should be.
I appreciate it.
It really is. It's the gold standard.
It's a pride and joy. And look, what's so funny, it's not like it was renovated. This is like probably 2-year-old product. Like it's not like we just launched something new. It just sort of got some buzz of late. But it's funny because you say this and I see it from both sides, right? I'm almost like, I have the law firm owner hat on here, and then I have the digital, the vendor hat over here. And it's so funny because the stuff that I've learned about, like you were talking about how many law firms succeed, how many don't, and the idea of how do they treat the people that they're working with. And I look at like some of our biggest success stories, and it's like, we had one early on client, went on to be, did some amazing work for like a 7-year run. And they had 2 partners, and one guy was just a lunatic. And one of the things about running a digital agency is you have all these people, and the people are so important. If anybody is a lunatic and starts screaming at our people, you just can't have it because you'll lose people. And so I said, I had to go to his partner and say, look, I love your firm, but we can't work with this guy. Can you help me? And he, to his credit, he had insight to know his partner was an a-hole, but he was able to say, no, from now on, you'll deal with me and our marketing person, and you won't deal with him. And that worked. Hasn't always. I've had other people say, piss off. My marketing person's gold. You have to work with her. And 2 weeks later, she's fired and I'm also out. So I think that the things that everyone's like, this sucks. But like many things in life, if you go to the $200 suit place and then you wonder why your suit isn't wearing well, there's a lot to it. And that when you are somebody like Tom, who has that, who, if you can make people that you're dealing with, all they are is people, feel wonderful and special, they walk through walls for you. And it's the people that are sort of doing the gotcha game that resent their fee per month, that are like, how can I demonstrate there's a problem? Look, everything is not straight, but with your own teams, you see that. We just talked about this whole thing. It's people, it's getting to do what you want to do at scale, not easy. And so those groups can be vicious with respect to this, but very often, if you dug 3 steps further, talking about the mastermind questions we're asking and saying, what did you budget? Were you responding to their calls and their stuff? There are times where somebody just isn't putting in the work, but there are also times where you could get a lot more if you basically just took advantage of the group that you're working with in a positive way.
Gotcha. So, okay, how long have you been an 8-figure law firm? I got to ask that question.
You know what? I don't know. It's been a while. And we broke 8 figures a while ago.
Okay. And it's funny because as you pass those milestones, like I know for me, there are law firms that are in the 6-figure range that like, I can't wait to break 7, right? Like you set that brass ring and it's kind of fuzzy in my memory, right? Because it was like probably 10 years ago. It was so long, but the uphill climb to the next brass ring feels like it's taken forever.
Well, I would say, and look, somebody told me this, and it was a much harder climb, from 10 to 20 than it was from 0 to 10. I didn't believe them, but I would argue that was your growth flattens. You can't double. When you're starting, there's doubling, and you get a few good units within your firm. You can keep millions add up, but that with scale, and this is a whole nother conversation, but I'm happy to sort of just touch on it, which is when you're smaller, you have X number of people, X number of direct reports. As you scale, and when it's very humbling when you go to like a holiday party and you don't know everybody. And granted, we flew some people in from international around the country, but when you have yourself, a management team, They have their team. And then there are people below them. Mid-level management is a whole nother, can of worms in the sense that you have to take people and you're promoting. This is true for managers in general, right? Another conversation for another day. Promoting people that are great at doing what they do with that risk that they may not be able to manage other people, right? There are people that are great at what they do. And
actually, I want to say Finkelstein was talking at one of John Fisher's masterminds who's like, look, you might have a great litigation paralegal. That does not mean she wants to be or should be a paralegal supervisor.
Exactly.
Don't do it, because then you could lose the great paralegal.
Right. Or you should be evaluating it in the background. Like, you don't want to interview somebody because you don't want it to be a no, but you should be able to know enough. Is this somebody you could replicate and could do this and make sure that they want it? Obviously that piece, but do you want it even before you pursue it? Absolutely. But the piece that gets very little talk about, because there aren't that many people, I talk with Jay on our podcast once in a while, is that mid-level management, because you're not touching that. So we're talking about employees you don't touch when you're smaller. Now they're managers that are not direct reports. And I think EOS has been great. I was not always a big coaching person. We didn't have EOS until a couple of years ago, but by implementing EOS down into the organization, even if you're smaller, and I don't know, Jules, how many people are part of your world, and maybe some international people, whatever it is.
She's got international team,
but the idea that you create, if you're doing something corporate with EOS, hypothetically, the goal is, and again, it may be sort of a placeholder where you do it with your international people, but it forces the meeting. We were so dysfunctional with meetings, with communication, with figuring out how to prioritize things and all of that. It's really, in much of life, marriage comes down to communication, and the fact that you're forced to do it. We used to joke when we first got married, like having a meeting of the marriage where we discuss home buying or kid time, whatever it is we were doing, and that the idea is that you're forcing yourself here to make sure that you are making plans, holding yourself accountable. That is priceless.
That actually is unbelievable advice. And actually, I'm in here. I'm like, okay, I know we're going to be talking about the magic of the L10 meetings, right? Jules knows what those look like. She's been in them. And so the fact that you're doing that with international team members, now Jules doesn't have to do individual marketing one-on-ones with the team members. Just do one marketing meeting for an hour and a half.
You may still have that.
Right.
But the idea is, and then the individual L10, the marketing L10, maybe 45, you have 2-3 people. It could be 45 minutes. It doesn't have to be that long. But the idea that you're doing that and you're empowering them to set their goals. One thing both BlueShark and Price Benowitz, BlueShark much better, has been, rolling out AI. We made that one of our goals. And so each department had to try 2 things at BlueShark. That would be including AI, much easier and stuff like content, but every link building, technical, what can each department do to test those? That's great and great lip service. But I love the firm, it's on EOS, that's great. When I watch the Gen Zers running true EOS, not lawyer EOS, because law firms have a lot of legacy issues. They have lawyers that other businesses don't have. But when you run, with people that care, that are into it, the sort of pressure they put on themselves to be there and be on track and to get this stuff done is unbelievable.
You brought up the word before. You said, I'm always looking for that fire, right? So I had a hellish fourth quarter because of that failure to align a KPI to a key position and the fallout from it. So everybody else was like devastated from it. And I was in a really good mood. So I get on with one of my CEO coaches, Patrick Wilson. I've talked to you about Patrick before. And he's like, you look remarkably calm. I'm like, yeah, I'm in my sweet spot. All hell's breaking loose and I'm generating a ton of money because of it. But again, I had to get my hands dirty to get back into the files and all of that. But that is that brain of ours that, that's where we shine, right? If there is chaos, we're kind of in the middle of the storm. I think,
and I think that the key, that's the good and bad, right?
Right.
And it's not healthy. And that as you can get other people to actually, be there, deal with the fires, that's the ideal. At this point, and again, depending on revenue levels, I feel like the more layers you have over time, that's why the luxury, once you're breaking 8 figures, you can have those layers. But that to invest in that team, I went from like never really wanting a non-revenue producing team to, we have I blinked. and it's pretty substantial. Head of ops to their deputy.
I was going to ask you about that because I was kind of shocked at the revenue level you're at. I've asked you a couple of times over dinner when I've seen you, hey, don't you have a C-suite? Like, because I've talked to like Dan Feynman, who we both know and we both work with, who's my fractional CFO. And I was like, look, man, tell me when, and I will have C-suite instituted. Just tell me what the revenue level is or when.
Look, that's the wrong question. It's not like there's not a point where you're going to hire 5 C-suite people.
That's what he said.
No, right. Because it's cray-cray. So what it is, you're bringing these people up and that, Jules is there. And if she so chooses, she'll be there long-term and she could go from whatever she's doing to director to CM.
Right.
Like there's a track.
Right.
It's not like you don't need I don't even have a CFO. I use a fractional CFO. So at some point you might expand that, right? So with each of these things, you have a team. The question is, can you true it up over time and get people that are excellent in each of those?
One of the significant values that you bring to my life and you bring to everybody that knows you is, you're very real. Like you are super down to earth. And maybe that's the New York in you, right? I love that you're from the city and I met your parents and, you said something really funny to me because I always formulate in my head, well, when I'm Seth's size, I'm going to have a C-suite, right? I'm going to have a C-suite and I could literally just remove myself and be this pure visionary. And you're like, it's not like that. It's just not like that. It's kind of still messy as you scale. You're multiple 8 figures and you're telling me like, look, man, life is life. It doesn't change the size and scope of the problems might change.
No, it does. And I think when I look north, when I see people like the Mike Morrises, they do genuinely have a real C-suite. And not like a defective suite. I mean, not that there aren't issues, but like he can disappear and the firm works. And as you go, you're less and less essential.
Right.
And there are pieces that you may have a secret sauce at, right? Only you can go to the local law school and speak and find the next generation of talent. Like there are things that only you can do. If you can free yourself up for those things, great.
Right.
But there are also things that theoretically with time you could outsource and have people do. It's just, if you're large enough, you could then have, I know firms that have a relationship person that goes to doctors and chiros and makes those house calls. And history is written by the victor. If they stay with you for 10 years, you're a genius. If they leave in 15 months, you're like, I just pissed that money away and now all those relationships are gone. So
Right. So what's next for you? What's the next thing? I mean, you're multi 8 figures. It's not about really the money, right? Like we know that at a certain point you is it just that you love to build something? You want to go to 9 figures and like, what's the aim for you? What's your focus?
That's a great question. I think that from the law firm point of view, it's creating those levels of insulation and stability so it does run itself. That it's more of a business than a law firm. Not that you don't want great legal work, but that's why I was talking to you about those pieces, because I feel like that's a missing piece to my ability if I want to scale. Like it's fun. Like if I could say, hey, hire 20 more lawyers and only a couple more administrative people, that's a pretty sweet place to be in life. Add marketing, add intake, and you're there. And so the limiting factor that I've hit my head, the reason why we're sort of as Jules asking these questions, I'm thinking to myself about where growth. We haven't doubled every 5 years the way we did when we were smaller, right? So the question, or even attorney count, necessarily revenue. So the question is, what pieces can I put in place that would allow that to happen? Because right now, I see this also from salespeople at BlueShark. There are only so many rock stars out there that fit your culture, that are there that you want to bring in. And that happens for lawyers. There are only so many. And hopefully you find somebody great who can fill the role we talked about for lawyers. That would be awesome, right? But that is going for one person to do all of it. Yes, you should do that. And part of it is once that's there, you could then layer people underneath that. Or you say, you know what, I'm going to be that coordinator. I'll have some guy who can litigate, but I'm going to actually still be the guy that coordinates those people until the point where there's critical mass and revenue for you to say, I can afford somebody to coordinate all that. And
to manage them, right?
Correct. And that's easier said than done. That's not for the faint of heart. And again,
it's not, man. It's not.
One of the reasons I'll sort of conclude with this, because I had a really interesting life moment. I always talk about on my podcast the fact that when I hire, and I see this across the board, people sometimes hire, it takes 3. The first person you hire isn't right. The second person is right. You finally, and half of it is you don't know what you need. You can write all the job descriptions you want, but somebody comes in and they're they hit your job description, but you're I need somebody with more common sense, or common sense isn't what I need. I need a grind, whatever it is, you figure that out along along the way. And I sort of had this mature moment where a woman who had superpowers, was an amazing networker, should be like a networking attorney, came through the pipeline as a sales attorney. I'm like, there's no way this person is going to sit with blinders on and take calls and sell. It just won't happen because they're so used to in their career dabbling, and they're amazing at it. And so it started like I'm trying to be more retrospective or introspective and think, okay, can I channel what I know won't work rather than what you and I generally do, which is, we'll see what happens, and like what happens to having a trusted advisor group around who interview and figure out what is that next move. Not that it's guaranteed to work, but trying to eliminate the obvious things that you know better than, but that when it's you and me sitting there like, yeah, we're going to do it versus methodically figuring out, will this person fit within the machine that we have?
You have been generous, gracious, and a pleasure to talk to, my man. And I love you have a couple of podcasts you do. You do the one with Jay, right? What's the name of that podcast? The Law Firm Blueprint. All right, we'll put a link to that.
Yeah, and I do one on SEO. So anybody who's an SEO geek, it's had a lot of luminaries in the SEO world. Jules, go back to some of the archives. There's some really good ones. Rand Fishkin and others.
Awesome.
We've had some real luminaries in the SEO space. And then I just started one, and that's the SEO Insider. And then Paul Faust and Paul was down in Florida. He's like,
I know.
Nobody not talking about conferences. So we got Craig's conference coming up. We got AAJ coming up. We got all these different. And each one has strengths and weaknesses. You and I talk these things, but getting a platform to be able to share with people what would be right for which people.
Love it. I'm constantly, I kind of copied your model and Craig's model. I'm like, look, it does me no good to sit behind my desk. I get on a plane at least once every 6 weeks for these conferences. And I have now expanded my reach nationwide, right? I'm getting cases from Alabama because they hear me on the podcast and then they see my LinkedIn, right? The stuff we talked about. So listen, I look at what you do and I steal from you, right? Like, but I'm so grateful to have you in my life as a guest, as a friend, and somebody that I know I could just shoot a text to or shoot a call to and be like, Seth, I'm struggling. What do I do? And you're able to see things laser focused and give an answer in like 30 seconds, a minute. If anybody that knows you has talked to you, like you're insightful and you're concise, but it works. And that's the stuff that kind of registers with me after the fact. So thank you so much for coming on, sharing with us. I'd love to have you on again. And I listened to the Conference Connection. I love it. Thanks for listening to the Lead Counsel Podcast. We are found wherever podcasts are distributed. Check out the links in the show notes. Seth Price's websites and different business offerings that he has, BlueShark Digital and others. And if you ever get a chance and you're at a mastermind where Seth is at, don't hesitate to reach out. If you found value in this show, please share it with your friends. Talk about it online, other law firm owners, or anybody you think that would benefit. Seth is spitting wisdom that anybody just wants to build an 8-figure law firm or an 8-figure business in general. Seth's got that knowledge. And man, he is so generous and giving. So,
and
thanks
such a cool guy.
On. Such a great guy. Such a great guy. And let me tell you, see how fast he talks and how fast I talk?
Yeah.
Can you imagine what our conversations are like when we're sitting there shooting business back and forth?
No, absolutely not.
Dude,
you guys speak a different language.
Two self-professed ADHD sufferers, and man, but his heart is so big. Like he just gives and relentlessly asks nothing in return, right? Like he's just an amazing guy. So Seth, thanks for coming on. And for anybody that can, if you're getting value out of the show, go onto iTunes or wherever you're listening and leave us a review. Give us a 5-star review. It goes a long way, and share it with people, please. All right.
Thank
Jules,
you, everybody.
we're out.